Definitely kind of a tough one. But do you think then that if we meet aliens, that do you think that would be how do you think that would be received by different people? And surely as well, the way that we run into them is going to be is going to have a huge impact on that because in some sense, I we were kind of having run-ins with that idea already. We had a couple weeks ago the Venus, or maybe a month ago, the whole idea that maybe Venus was hosting alien life, and they're always hypotheticals, but I feel like they're kind of warming the room to the idea of having aliens. So, what do you think that would look like if we all of a sudden discovered aliens?
Yeah, so my advisor and my lab here at ASU, they have actually looked at this a little bit as a part of ASU's interplanetary initiative. And so what they did was they showed people news articles about finding alien life. They manipulated it a little bit, like, oh, it was like microbial life, or no, it was sentient life. And they found that people were actually pretty enthusiastic about the idea. So they had this viewpoint that was more about, well, here's all the good things that could come out of alien life. Maybe we trade technology with them, we trade ideas, and we get all this new innovation out of it. So they weren't as concerned about the risks. Um, but another thing to note is that people in this study actually thought that they had more of a positive view than the rest of humanity would. So what they're saying there is like, I'm really enthusiastic about the idea of receiving aliens. I think it'll be a good thing, but like everybody else might not have the same viewpoint as me. That's kind of a common thing that we do. We sometimes believe that our opinions are more extreme, or other people's opinions are more extreme, depending on the context. Um, I think that these findings, though, and they do note this, are people's, you're sitting in front of a computer screen reading an article, fake or not. But when we would actually be confronted with the reality of there's this strange thing that just landed on Earth and we don't know anything about it, I don't think we're going to react as positively as we think we are.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I think this is because of research on prejudice. Humans oftentimes are really afraid of the unknown. Um, think about the racial issues we've seen just in America in the last few months. So the idea that we would just magically get along with some sentient alien life because of the promise and opportunities they bring doesn't really add up, at least to me. I
I,
want to think that we'd have a positive viewpoint, but I think we're more likely to go to nuclear war before we're going to sit down and have a productive conversation if something's flying towards
I,
us.
Yeah, and
I was gonna say whoever finds whom first is gonna have a huge impact on
Mm-hmm.
that because if we find them and they have no way of coming to us, that's definitely one thing. And speaking for myself, that would be really exciting. However, if one day they just land here and show up and say hi, what's up, I I could see how that would create how that would create room for a lot of fear and unhappiness.
and for this study out of Arizona State, was this based just on U.S. citizens that you gathered in like the Arizona area, or because I'm curious to know how much of an effect pop culture and like people growing up with science fiction movies and whether they're whether or not they saw ET or if they saw Predator, and maybe that how that impacts how they respond to your questionnaires.
That's a really good point. So another thing they did, and again, this is mostly looking at U.S. news articles, was the valence of words used in news articles. So they did more of like a linguistic analysis on news articles, and we found the same thing. People tend to be positively biased. Another thing we have talked about doing, though, is looking at a cross-cultural sample. Especially looking at maybe Japan or South Korea, where they still have the pop culture influence of aliens, but it's
Mhm.
kind of a not drastically different, but a fairly different culture from that of what we see in the US. I'd be inclined to agree with you, Michael. It's about what is your influence so far? Have you taken a class on aliens like I have, where you realize the odds of this happening at all are pretty slim, so what does it matter in the first place? Or was your first exposure to aliens ET, or was it Predator? It's probably going to have an impact based on how you learned about this concept and how it initially formed in your head. But again, the templates we have in our evolved brain is like, if this thing is new and unfamiliar and poses any sort of threat, I should probably be more wary of it than I should be embracing.
Yeah, because I mean, America is also because of its the history of its making, has inherited more of a pioneering attitude towards new things and new places. A lot more so than, for example, you would find in Europe, which didn't move when they had because the people who are still there are the people who didn't move when they could have kind of early on. And so I imagine that there would be a really big impact on how much, if you would see that as an opportunity or a threat to your lifestyle and your well-being.
It's an interesting point that you could almost look at, like, how open are you to new experiences? That's like a personality trait that's commonly measured. One of the things our lab often controls for when we're thinking about things is how many immigrants do you have in that particular culture? Because if you are often operating in an environment where you're interacting with people you're unfamiliar with, if there's a lot of exchange of cultural ideals, you're probably more likely to be a little bit open to those things than, say, in a really established community like Europe tends to be, where there's not a ton of immigration and migration. People tend to stay in one spot, or like the rural parts of America.
Is that something?
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this podcast episode. This is Michael.
This is Sam.
This is Tommy.
And this is Joe.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to leave a review. All of the show notes can be found either in the description below or on our website. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next week with more Everything Astronomy.